Gut-mind connections. How many of you have heard of the word gut microbiome? Oh, that's lots of people. That's good. Okay, well, I'll talk to you today about the gut microbiome and the brain. So I'll first discuss a little bit about what the future of chronic diseases looks like. So it will be self-care, which means that you won't need to go to a doctor, you won't need to go to a hospital. Healthcare will be delivered straight to you via an app, and it'll be truly preventative, which means that there won't be a need for drugs anymore to treat symptoms. We will prevent diseases before they ever occur, so there won't be any symptoms. And it'll be highly personalized. We're all extremely different from each other, and so everything that I listed there will be highly personalized for every person on the planet. And what does that look like in real life? You can see an app there that tells you exactly to eat bok choy, and it tells you exactly why to eat bok choy, and then it tells you to avoid bell pepper, and it tells you exactly why to avoid bell pepper, and it tells you what supplements to take, and so on. So it will also show you your health status. So your app will be like an instrument dashboard on an airliner. For every single condition, every single one of the 50 plus chronic diseases, it will show you over time how you're doing relative to that condition, and it'll show you at that time where you are, so that you have a feedback. If you follow your personalized recommendations for your diet and exercise and fasting and sleep and so on, you will actually see on the dashboard that the feedback is that your condition is great at the molecular level, and you will not suffer the symptoms of that disease. For example, this will apply to heart attacks and heart disease and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and everything else. So I'm not actually here speculating. I actually know that this is the future. And how do I know that? Is because we're inventing it, right? So this is my favorite phrase that I live by every single day. We're not waiting for this to happen, and we're not predicting. We're actually making this happen every single day of my life, right, at my company. And that's, I think, the only way to predict the future. So what do we know? So you probably have read a bit about the gut-brain connection. There are even books out there talking about the gut-brain axis. And so I'll just give you a little bit of an intro here that the gut actually produces many of the neurotransmitters. It's either the gut microbiome or our own intestinal cells, and they control our satiety and hunger. And our gut microbiome actually trains our immune system. So vast majority of our immune system sits in the gut. It's not in some other parts of the body. And then also, the second largest nervous organ in the body is not your spinal cord. It's actually the gut, the intestines, because more neurons are sitting there than in our spinal cord. And so the gut is extremely complex, and we're just starting to learn about it. I think the technology and the EQ factor over the last few decades have prevented us from understanding the true potential, and now it's come to the forefront of science. So on the brain side, you can see there that I've listed some things that it controls in terms of the gut, intestinal motility and secretions. Vagus nerve is one of the biggest nerves in our body, and it connects directly the gut and the brain. And there are lots of connections that have been established in scientific literature that we don't have time to cover. And we still have to discover a lot of these connections. Okay, so who here has heard of fecal microbiota transplant, FMT? Okay, not very many people. So FMT is a process that takes poop from someone else and literally physically installs it in another person, right? And it can go from the front end or the back end, depending on which method is used, and both are commonly used. And so while this sounds gross at first, it's actually a medical miracle, right? So today, the number one infectious disease killer in the United States is not influenza anymore. It's a microorganism called Clostridium difficile. It kills 30,000 Americans every single year, and the only known cure for it is a fecal microbiota transplant, which means that modern medicine can give up on people completely, meaning that they've done everything they could and this person is still going to die, they can perform this FMT even at home. Many people perform it at home. If you go to YouTube and search for FMT, there are very detailed descriptions of how to do it. You just buy $15 worth of supplies on Amazon and you can do it in 5 minutes. And so there are examples on YouTube where someone was basically on their deathbed and the doctors told them, you're going to die any day. There's nothing we can do for you anymore. She did an FMT from her daughter, and 3 days later, she was as good as new, right? So this is what they call medical miracle. It just can't, there's nothing modern medicine can do. And so it turns out that FMT can also treat depression, and this has been published. So that's very powerful. So that means you take poop from someone who's not depressed, give it to someone who is depressed, and all of a sudden their depression goes away. It's actually been shown that if you take poop from a healthy human or a depressed human and give it to a mouse that doesn't have any microbiome, those mice will have the phenotype to mirror the phenotype of the human. Prebiotics and probiotics. So prebiotics are fibers that our gut microbiome uses to live, and probiotics are live bacteria that we would consume in order to enrich the functions of the gut microbiome. And so there was a study, a large study, that summarizes basically that there are many clinical trials that show efficacy of prebiotics and probiotics in treating anxiety. Pharmaceutical companies cannot do that. And so this is a really nice natural approach. Unfortunately, there's a lot more work to do here to make it higher efficacy, to make it highly personalized. Schizophrenia, I think, is a huge problem. I hate to see a website like the National Institute of Mental Health saying, even though only 1% of the population has it. Well, that's several million people. That's not only, that's a massive number of people who are suffering this debilitating disease, and modern medicine has zero clue as to what causes it. Literally, there is no even hint as to what causes schizophrenia. And so, if you look at this publication here, this was done in mice, but if you take poop from a healthy human and put it into a mouse, the mouse is healthy. If you take the poop from a person who has schizophrenia and put it in the same kind of a mouse, they develop schizophrenic behavior. And so you can actually cause schizophrenia in a mouse model just by using poop transplant from a person. That's a very significant finding, and we can't just ignore that. And then there's gut microbiome and cognition. I assume you guys all heard about these news that the Chinese FDA just approved this drug for treating Alzheimer's. They performed a very large trial on 820 people, and this naturally found oligosaccharide in brown algae can actually, via the gut microbiome, treat Alzheimer's. In this case, it's mild cognitive impairment, which is the first stage of Alzheimer's. And so this is really super cool in my opinion, because this is the concept at Viome, is that the gut microbiome is the root cause, or one of the biggest root causes of most chronic diseases, and we can modulate its functions with food. And so we're going to be treating all chronic diseases and preventing them and reversing them with nothing but food. There's no need to do anything else. Okay, let's talk about genetics. I really want to put a spotlight on this absolute disaster that we've experienced over the last 20 years. This is a massive disaster. So in the 1990s, scientists were saying that genetics, let's sequence the human genome, that's where all the secrets are to all the diseases, and once we sequence the human genomes, we will understand every disease and cure everyone. Well, the human genome was sequenced in 2000, it's 20 years later, we haven't cured anyone on any chronic disease. In fact, we have extremely solid data to show that none of the chronic diseases are actually genetically passed. So, and this is all very nicely done in twin studies. So genetics plays a very minor role in chronic diseases. And so why are we still pouring billions of dollars into genetic research that the best it can do is this? So let's say you have Crohn's disease. You do a genetic test, and 23andMe tells you you have a higher chance of developing Crohn's disease. How useful is that? That has zero usefulness. You can't do anything with it. Well, duh, I already know I have Crohn's disease. What do I actually do with that information? Nothing. It doesn't tell you to do anything. It's not actionable. If you don't have chronic disease, and they tell you, ooh, you have a high risk of Crohn's disease, that's bad. What do I do about it? Nothing. It doesn't tell you to do anything. It just tells you you are more likely to develop Crohn's disease. That's the power of genetics today, after 20 years of sequencing the human genome. So it's really frustrating for me to read studies such as this one. This study was published this year in the American Journal of Psychiatry, saying that hundreds of millions of dollars of genetic research on depression are a complete waste of money. You literally could have taken that money and dumped it down the drain, and the effect would be exactly the same. That's what that paper says. Look at the quote from the study author, Matthew Keller. We did not find a smidge of evidence. How on earth could we have spent 20 years and hundreds of millions of dollars studying pure noise? Okay? And then for psychiatric genetic research, for example, the National Institute of Mental Health spends over $100 million per year on genetic research. So not only have we been making a mistake over the last 20 years, we're continuing to make mistakes. We're pouring $100 million into genetic research when it's clear that it doesn't do anything. So, nutrition actually works. This is a SMILES trial out of Australia that showed that a modified Mediterranean diet can treat depression. This is a randomized controlled trial, right? The gold standard. Now, unfortunately, it helps some people a lot, other people a little bit, some people it doesn't help at all, and some people actually get worse. And the reason for that overall average positive effect is that we're all different, and we all need a different diet. Mediterranean diet, ketogenic diet, paleo diet is not the solution for everyone, and I'll explain why. So what is next? And so what is next is what we're inventing, which is a data-driven, personalized diet and lifestyle for every single person on the planet. So this is our vision that we're executing currently. You can take any person, whether they're sick or healthy, you perform at-home tests to collect vast amounts of data, and then you use machine-learned algorithms to tell that person exactly what to eat, when to fast, when to exercise, how to sleep, everything, so that they can live a very long and a very healthy life. That woman right there in the picture is allegedly 101. I have a very hard time believing that, but that's what the internet says. So, but she's like a YouTube celebrity. But this is the concept. Basically, perform vast amounts of testing on every single individual, and then use that data to actually tell you what you need to do and not the average human. So, why has genetics failed? Look at this statistic here. Every single one of you here in the room has 20,000 genes that are encoded in your genome that you inherited from your mom and dad. But guess what? There are millions of other genes on your body that are not yours. And so if you look at that ratio, it's clear that vast majority of who you are is not determined by your genes. And that is the reason why chronic diseases are not caused by your genetics, because you're not you. You're mostly not you. You're mostly the microbes that live on you and in you, right? And so microbiome and nutrition and lifestyle are key to prevention and treatment and reversal of chronic diseases. And so let's get a little more technical. I want everyone today, after this conversation, to understand what RNA is. Who knows what RNA is today? Can you raise your hand? Ouch. I have an uphill battle here. All right, so DNA has been talked about. Who knows what DNA is? Everyone, right? Everyone knows what DNA is. Okay. DNA is super boring. Super boring. It's the most boring thing in life, okay? It is super boring. RNA is exciting, it's dynamic, it's sexy, it's functional. It is who you are, okay? It is super awesome. So let me explain that to you. So I'm showing you here 3 human organs. If you sequence the DNA of your kidneys, liver, and brain, it will be identical. Every single cell in your body has the same DNA. So why is the kidney completely different from your brain? Completely different. It looks different. It performs different functions. Everything is different about it. Why is that? It's because it's expressing a subset of those 20,000 genes that enable it to be the kidney. Your brain is expressing a subset of those 20,000 genes that enable it to be the brain. Okay? And they're very different. So they have the same DNA content, and you can sequence them 1,000,000 times and you'll still get the same result. You can keep spending money and time sequencing them, you'll always get the same result. But if you sequence the RNA in those organs, it's going to be black and white different because they're so different. So the point is that DNA is an object in space. It is a double-stranded helix that's floating inside cells. It doesn't do anything, and it will never do anything. It is not capable of doing anything. It has a potential to be copied into RNA, which is then converted into a protein that performs a function. And that's what we feel. That's what makes who we are, and that's what makes every one of these organs what they are. And so RNA is really the key to understanding our body and how it functions. More than this, I don't know if I have a slide on this, I don't, but more importantly than this previous slide is that the difference between a healthy kidney and a diseased kidney is in the RNA. The difference between someone having an IBD flare today versus being in remission the next month is not in DNA. Their DNA is the same, right? A month apart, the DNA hasn't changed. It's the RNA, it's the expression level. And so if we can fine-tune that expression level, we can keep everyone healthy. I hope I explained that well, because that's a really important concept.
RNA is sexy.
RNA is sexy, very sexy. If that's all you remember, that's good enough for me. So what about this interaction between the microbes and us? We are an ecosystem, and we have evolved to live with microbes. So we've not been alone. We've been literally evolving with the microbes for millions of years. And so if you look at the human genome today, we have 20,000 genes. You can find a worm that's a millimeter length in the soil that has 32,000 genes. So why does a worm that's tiny, that doesn't have most of the functions we have more than 50% more genes than we do? It's because we don't need that many genes, because we count on the microbiome to provide a lot of functionality to our bodies. And one of the main reasons that chronic diseases are so prevalent in modern world and are becoming more prevalent is because we're destroying continuously this microbiome that we've evolved to depend on. And so here's one example that I think is the root cause of autism. So there are many bacteria that are capable of living in soil, and they're also capable of living in our intestines. Now, those bacteria, they have to know which environment they're in order to express the genes, RNA, to allow them to live in those two different environments, right? Soil is very different from our intestines. And so the way those bacteria know whether they're inside our intestines or inside the soil is that they produce a chemical that pings continuously, like a sonar. And if the echo that comes back is serotonin, then they know they're inside the intestine, because there's nothing that makes serotonin in soil. So they ping continuously, and if the return signal is serotonin, then, oh, I'm in the intestine, I'm going to express a certain set of genes to live in the intestine. We use that mechanism to produce serotonin. So 90% of the human production of serotonin in our body is actually in the gut. It's not in the brain, right? And so we're just discovering these mechanisms. It's so complex. But we depend on these bacteria to produce serotonin. And so there's many, many more stories like this. But the point is that microbes control our gene expression, and we can control microbes with food because we give them food. These microbes don't live off thin air. They live only off what we give them, right? And so I want you to also, as another takeaway, to think about our food not as rice and wheat, but to think of it in terms of it's a vessel for a bunch of different kinds of molecules that are feeding your physiology and the microbiome, and that it's all a chemical reaction. Here's the example I gave you. So every single person who has IBD, whether that's ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, they go through these phases throughout their life of remission, relapse, right? How can you possibly think that DNA has anything to do with this when the DNA doesn't change through these phases? Someone is sick as a dog and they can't go anywhere and do anything for months, and then all of a sudden they get better, and then they go through these cycles. Of course, it's RNA. And so we just need to learn how that works. This is really a sort of a technical slide, but it shows what we do at Viome. We look at the human body as an ecosystem of food, your nutrition, and immune system, and gut microbiome, and your genes all combined that create this system of chemical reactions that allow you to be physiologically healthy and thrive. And when those chemical reactions get dysbiotic, that's when people become sick. And so we are trying to use all of these systems and modulate all these systems via nutrition in order to keep us healthy. This is what functional pathways in one bacterium look like. So this is extremely complicated. So you have to generate a lot of data, you have to have a lot of computational power, and you have to study tens of thousands of people in order to understand what actually happens. I'm just going to breeze through these slides. You're welcome to ask me after the talk what that all means, but basically this slide means that we can now distinguish people who are healthy from people who are sick just by analyzing their stool sample. And the difference between people who are sick and healthy is not in who is inside their gut microbiome. It's what biochemistry they're performing. So 95% of the features in this model that distinguishes healthy from unhealthy people is what is their microbiome doing? It's not, does it have this bacterium or this bacterium? So when you guys read or hear someone saying, oh, Bifidobacterium longum is good and Coprococcus something is bad, no, they can both be good and bad. It depends on what genes they're expressing and what they're doing for you biochemically, and not what the made-up human name is. My brain needs serotonin. Whether that serotonin is produced by the stimulus from Bifidobacterium longum or Coprococcus something, my brain doesn't care what humans named something. That makes no difference on my physiology. What makes a difference is the right chemical reaction being performed. So this is our systems biology platform where we take a lot of data in, we perform data science, and create these machine-learned predictive algorithms for every disease, and then we convert that into personalized diet algorithms. And currently, those 4 diseases that I mentioned there, we've advanced enough. We have analyzed samples from more than 10,000 people combined, so we are ready to perform clinical trials. And so sometime early next year, we'll initiate these clinical trials. And these clinical trials, when they're successful, it will be the first time in history that we can actually show in a clinical trial that we can treat a human chronic disease using everything that you can buy at a Whole Foods, meaning 100% of the treatment is at Whole Foods. You don't need to go to some weird Chinese shop. You don't need to go to Bulgaria to get some holy water. You don't need to go to a doctor. Your app tells you exactly what you need to go and put on your shopping list at Whole Foods, and you go and you prevent and treat and reverse the disease, right? And so those are the 4 things that we've made the biggest progress in. So that's the revolution that's happening, and that's why I'm saying this is not a speculation. This is already happening. We just have to demonstrate it in a FDA-approved format. Okay, so let's go with key takeaways. So this first point is one of the most frustrating things to me, is that genetics does not determine a disease. And the second one is that it's bad luck. If you ask, if someone gets multiple sclerosis today, in the 21st century, that's considered bad luck. We're not in 15th century anymore. Why is a chronic disease a bad luck? Someone develops pancreatic cancer, and that's considered bad luck. That's extremely frustrating to me as a scientist. We now have all of science and technology that allows us to understand exactly what the underlying cause of these diseases are. But here's the frustration. In academia, the vast amounts of money that we put in is distributed among thousands of researchers. They all have their methods, their angle, their question, and they study 10 people at a time. And that's why in one study, coffee is good for you. Another study, coffee is bad for you. One day wheat is good, another day it's not. You guys have read this, right? You get this absolutely massive contradictory information. It's because they're studying small population of people, they're trying to make an average, and they're trying to report some sexy news. It turns out none of you in this room are the average. None of you. And so any study that you read today where it says this is good for you, that is good for their average study participant in that study. That's all it means. It doesn't mean anything that it's for you. Nothing. It literally just ignore it. That's how useful it is. So that's what academia do. I was an academic for 12 years, so I speak from experience. When an academic retires, they say, I have 128 papers published. That is what they contributed to the society, an average academic, right? That is one of the biggest wastes in our society today, that these are the smartest, hardest working, well-meaning people, highest educated people. We're giving them so much money, and the end result is they have 128 publications by the time they retire. Who have you helped? How have you moved the needle forward? How have you improved human life and suffering? Well, that's not their objective. So that's a real shame. On the other hand, pharma is spending trillions of dollars. Let's take rheumatoid arthritis, for example. So I had rheumatoid arthritis when I was 25, early onset rheumatoid arthritis. For 15 years I had it. At the end of that, my right hip was locking up. I couldn't pick up things. I had restless leg syndrome. I had this systemic condition that the doctors diagnosed as autoimmune. Okay? It was 100% false diagnosis because, in fact, I did not have an autoimmune disease. But they diagnosed me as such so they can prescribe drugs that suppress my immune system. Okay? And when I started taking those drugs and then looked at the side effects, I realized this is worse than my disease. But the prospect was that I was going to be in a wheelchair in my 40s and 50s, so I had to take them, right? Turns out there was a very specific reason for my rheumatoid arthritis, and that was an antigen that was found in mammalian foods. So any mammalian product, red meat or dairy, contained this particular kind of a sugar called Nu5GC that my body incorporated and my immune system recognized as foreign, and it mounted this chronic inflammation that caused me these symptoms. Once I removed that antigen from my diet, my disease not only went away, but completely cured itself. So I've been now completely disease-free for 5 years. That, if you ask 100 rheumatologists, yeah. So if you ask, I now work with rheumatologists on autoimmune diseases, and every time I remind them autoimmune disease, they know. I work with them. If you ask 100 rheumatologists, is rheumatoid arthritis a curable disease? 100% of them will say, no, it's not. The best we can do is slow down the progression and buy you extra few years of life. Well, when you're in your 30s and you can't do the dishes and you can't carry groceries from the store to the car, that's a very bad prospect, right? That's a very bad lifestyle. And every decision you make from the moment you wake up until you fall asleep, the first circuit that fires up in your brain is, should I do this? How am I going to do this? How much ice am I going to need afterwards, and which medication I'm going to take afterwards? When every single action in your life revolves around that, that's a bad prospect, and that's where we are in the 21st century, right? So we really need to understand the science. Now, the point I was trying to make is that the number one condition in the world right now for drug sales is autoimmune. And it turns out that biologics, injectable biologics, make $55 billion a year, and all they do is suppress the immune system. Pharma has not ever tried or attempted or is not shy about it to actually try to understand, why is this wrong? Why is something wrong with you, and how can we prevent that? And that's one of the biggest focus areas in my company, and that's driven by me because I want to just rid the world of this parasite, right? It's a true parasite. It's waiting for you to develop a disease, and then it helps you manage this disease by charging you enormous amounts of money, bouncing you from doctor to doctor, from hospital to hospital, from insurance to insurance, and you're still suffering every single day. That is the state of the art today, and it's absolutely unacceptable. We just have to work really hard, but if we just wait for things to happen, they haven't happened. And so that's why I started this company with Naveen Jain, and we're going to make it happen because that's the only way I think it goes. All right, so next. So chronic diseases are a result of complex interplay between all these different systems, your nutrition, your microbiome, your immune system, your genes. And there's no one diet fits all. Today, when our machine learned algorithms make a recommendation for a personalized diet to 100 people, every single one of those people gets a different diet. There is absolutely no one diet that fits all. If there was, we would have found it by now. So don't fall for that. And then systems biology enables us to understand the human body like it's never been understood, that such that we can actually modulate it and we can actually prevent, treat, and reverse these diseases. So this is my last slide. I wanted to show you where I live and where I work and where Viome was born. So on the right side of this picture is Los Alamos National Laboratory in Los Alamos, New Mexico. It is the size of Washington, D.C., and it employs 12,000 people. Majority of those are scientists. So I live in the county that has the highest percentage of college and PhD educated people. So restaurant conversations get very interesting. And then you can see these mesas coming off the mountains, and the one in the middle, there's sort of a big canyon, and there's a runway on the right side. Viome sits at the end of that runway, so that's where we are, at 7,200 feet, and the mountains in the back are above Santa Fe, and they're at 13 or 12,000 feet. So it's a stunning location to be at, and I'm very excited about that. Well, that's all I have to say.